Good afternoon, Excellencies,
Good afternoon from Cambodia,
delegates, and the capital-based officials. My name is Ambassador Adamu Mohammed Abdul Hamid, the Nigerian ambassador to the World Trade Organization. I have the privilege to moderate the third session of this event. I must welcome each and every one of you to this very important event. We have witnessed the first and the second sessions this morning, and we are in the third session. The two sessions were conducted successfully, and I hope this particular one will be better. The session is to discuss on the role of the National Trade Facilitation Committee and the implementation. The session will examine the critical role of National Trade Facilitation Committees in the context of TFA implementation. I have the pleasure of welcoming to the podium the finalists, which include Mr. Vijay Shankhaushan, Commissioner of Customs of India. I would also like to welcome the remaining finalists who are online. Mr. Edwin Vasca, Under Secretary of Trade Negotiations, Ministry of Production of Ecuador. Ms. Jolene Modeste Hariniana, Permanent Secretary of the National Trade Facilitation Committee of Madagascar. Ms. Elsing Edis, Head of Department, Director General for International Agreement and European Union, Ministry of Trade of Turkey. Mr. Chase Samna, Deputy Director, Department of International Customs Cooperation, General Department of Custom and Exercise of Cambodia, Ministry of Economy and Finances of Cambodia. I invite you to find out more about the extensive experience through their bios on our event website. It is usual to introduce the members of the panelists by giving a short bio of them, but due to the time factor that we have, we request you to get their details in the website. Panelists, you are all very welcome. As a former National Secretary of the Nigerian Trade Facilitation Committee, this is a topic close to my heart. If the TFA agreement itself presents the route that members have agreed to facilitate trade, then the national committees are the vehicles to travel that route. They provide the dynamism, the momentum, and the progress that allow WTO members to implement the agreement. As we approach the final deadline for the notification of definitive dates by least developed countries, the National Trade Facilitation Committees will be as important in the coming implementation phase of the agreement as they have been necessary in coordinating the input from across government to meet the notification requirements. National committees are the bodies that retain the institutional memory and capacity, firstly to designate their commitment and then at a later stage to notify their implementation date for categories B and C commitment. They also work with development partners to secure the necessary assistance to implement the Category C commitment. I would like to start our discussion this afternoon by inviting each panelist to give us a brief overview of their National Trade Facilitation Committee. Following this broad overview, we will have a more in-depth discussion covering a range of topics. These will include the structure, sustainability, and continuity of National Trade Facilitation Committees, private sector involvement, achievement to date, outstanding challenges, and the role of regional economic communities. There will also be an opportunity for questions from the audience at the end of the session. I would like to ask each panelist to give us a brief overview in no more than 2 minutes of their national committee, covering the following details: when the committee was established, the composition of the committee, e.g. ministries, agencies, private sector, and any other participating stakeholder, how often it meets. As the final speaker, I would like to ask Mr. Shofola to give us his reflection in these points at the level of ECOWAS, National Trade Facilitation Committee. I'm sure you have heard during the second session when Ghana addressed you by informing you that the ECOWAS had a regional trade facilitation committee, and Ghana happens to be the chair of that committee. So we want to explore, to get some insight from an official from the ECOWAS on what they have been doing in that regard. So without wasting much time, may I invite Mr. Shine Chong, as you are right here by my side, to start with your presentation. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you for inviting me to be here. It's a pleasure. Was privileged to hear the interactions in the morning. And the first thing that I noticed was that we in India seem to have got something right in designing our NCTF because of the concerns which were highlighted by different participants and the panelists in the morning. India's Trade Facilitation Committee was set up on 11th of August 2016. So as soon as the agreement was done, we were fairly quick in putting in place the mechanism. The mechanism is pretty elaborate, and there are reasons for doing that. Essentially, we wanted to highlight two different things. One is the commitment and the ownership. It is for this reason that the Indian Trade Facilitation Committee is headed by the senior-most civil servant in the country. It has representatives from all the major federal ministries which may have anything to do with trade facilitation, not merely the provisions of the Trade Facilitation Agreement. The NCTF, one of the first things, I say NCTF because that's the word we use in the Indian body is called. So the first thing it did was it designed a National Trade Facilitation Action Plan 2017 to 20, having 96 specific provisions, which were to implement all the Category B commitments, improve upon certain Category A commitments that were done, and the remaining, which were called TFA plus, which covered essentially infrastructure and technology enablers, which would promote trade facilitation. The committee therefore had all the regulatory entities and private sector participation. The point that was made since morning that it is very important to have the private sector participation because they truly know where the shoe pinches. And it served two purposes. One is that we were able to communicate to them the essence of our initiatives and what was driving us there, and two, to get their regular feedback and also have them as an equal partner in the process of putting in place a trade facilitative environment in the country. How often does it meet? So we have a three-tiered structure. The top apex body meets twice a year. It is guided by a steering committee which meets every quarter and submits a report to NCTF every 6 monthly, and that is taken into account. Below that, there were 5 ad hoc working groups which looked into separate areas, and they provided inputs into the design of the first trade facilitation action plan, and thereafter in the second one. So the second one, so in India, the trade facilitation is the action plan is a live document, which is being supported by an elaborate structure. And therefore, despite COVID, we have been able to have their meetings held regularly, irrespective of the challenges which were presented. Thank you.
Thank you, India. May I invite Ms. Edis from Turkey to make her intervention for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to first thank to all those who have put their valuable efforts into the organization of this event. And I would also like to congratulate all the countries who have made their best efforts in the implementation of this agreement in the past 5 years. Turkey is one of those countries with the highest level of commitments among developing countries, having notified all the commitments under category A. And National TF Committee in Turkey was established back in 2016, which then reorganized in 2019 to reflect administrative changes through a presidential decree. In our view, the importance of the National Trade Facilitation Committees come from their ability and competence to be a leading platform for a dialogue between government and private sector representatives. And by all means, I think this is what we have achieved in Turkey. Because as it stands, the National TF Committee reflects the nationwide ownership of trade facilitation, wider trade facilitation agenda in Turkey. As of today, we have 23 members of the committee, 12 of which belonging to private sector. Private sector is being strongly represented in our national committee through their umbrella organizations, and their weight in the overall committee representation does not only come from their quantitative weight, because they make almost half of the membership, but they are also able to be in the process of decision making on equal footing with that of the public bodies. Besides key relevant ministries and agencies, public agencies, in order to represent private sector, we have, for example, Turkish Industry and Business Association, Chambers of Commodity and Exchange, Turkish Chamber of Shipping, International Transportation Association, Maritime Association of Ship Owners, Union of Banks, Turkish Exporters Assembly, and Association of International Forwarding and Logistics to represent private sector in the committee. But I would like to say a couple of words before concluding this session. 3 working groups are being co-chaired in collaboration with the public and private sector partnership. So private sector representation in the Turkish National TF Committee is quite strong, and they are able to be part of the process in each and every step. We have, since the beginning, adopted rather a flexible approach in terms of the membership status of the private sector, especially private sector in the overall structure of the committee, which means that even if there is no pre-designation or pre-definition in terms of their membership status, whenever there is a necessity, whenever we deem appropriate, we are open to invite other private sector bodies which are not represented as the standing or defined members of the committee. And for example, this includes the Association of Authorized Economic Operators, as well as International Investors Association of Turkey. And before concluding, let me also add that the committee itself has to convene at least once a year, but whenever necessary, we are able to convene working groups and sub-working groups on the basis of specific issues, projects we're covering. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tokia. I still want to repeat that the panelists should kindly respect the time in the 2-minute times given because of the limited time we have for this program. The next, I will invite Mr. Bach from the Ecuador to make his intervention for 2 minutes, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente, señores miembros de la sala. En el caso de Ecuador, el Comité de Facilitación de Comercio fue creado en marzo del 2018. Está conformado por las principales instituciones o entidades públicas que están vinculadas a las actividades relacionadas a la facilitación del comercio y también está integrado por representantes del sector privado. Hay representantes permanentes de las organizaciones horizontales vinculadas al sector privado, especialmente al sector exportador, pero por supuesto, dependiendo de la temática a tratar, también se invita a otras entidades del sector privado, particularmente los vinculados a los aspectos logísticos. El Comité de Facilitación de Comercio tiene como objetivo fundamental la implementación de los compromisos del acuerdo de facilitación,
Sorry,
así como
can you hold on a bit? I think the
acuerdos
interpreters are complaining that the is not too clear.
Ahí sí, un
Very
problema.
poor.
Espera un momento.
So can you check your connection? If otherwise, we can go to the next and come back to you later.
Sí. Sí, por favor, más bien, ahí creo que está mejor. No, hay eco. Ahí me escuchan mejor. Ahí creo que está mejor.
We will come back to you, please. Turkey.
Okay.
Okay. So I will call Madagascar, then later we come back to you, please. So Madagascar, Miss Harininia, you are to take the floor, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, d'avoir donné la parole. Et on tient aussi à remercier tous les organisateurs pour avoir organisé un tel événement important. Alors, pour répondre aux questions qui ont été demandées, le Comité national sur la facilitation des échanges de Madagascar a été créé.
Sorry, I think the interpreters are still having the same problem. Can we just pause for 1 minute to see whether there could be things to be done to address it here? Okay, can you try again so that we can see whether it is working?
Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Oui, vous m'entendez? Est-ce que la connexion est maintenue?
Hold on for a minute, please. I think there should be a technical problem. So how do we check it? So members, I'm afraid I think there's a technical challenge and I think we just need to continue to manage the situation before it is rectified from the other end. Otherwise, the panelists are speaking and the interpreters are not really getting the message clearly for them to interpret. So we have this challenge. Can we continue as it is, or we have to pause for a few minutes to see whether the technical fault will be addressed? Thank you. Madagascar, you will also have to bear with us. We'll go to the next. That's Mr. Che from Cambodia to take the floor. Then we'll come back to Madagascar and Ecuador later. Ms. Che from Cambodia, you have the floor, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure and honor to participate in the sessions. Cambodia NCTF was established in 2020 to replace a former committee that worked on export facilitations and trade facilitation. And our new committee have a new visions to maximize trade facilitation, to improve the economic competitiveness and trade growth. And our mission is to implement fully the provision of TFA and also to reduce the cost and time of doing trades. We have main 4 functions of our NCTF. First, importantly, to ensure the functioning of NCTF and Secretariat. Second, to ensure the full implementation of provision of TFA. Third, close cooperation with OGA, private sectors and development partners. And fourth, looking beyond other measures that working on trade facilitation, which is not covered under the TFA. Our committee was composed of 11 members from other ministry and chaired by the Secretary of State of Ministry of Finance. And we have deputy chair, the first deputy chair from Ministry of Commerce, the second deputy chair from Custom. And we created the Secretariat to make sure that our committee was fully functions. And the Secretariat is placed at the General Department of Custom and Excise of Department. And also to ensure the full functionings of the committee, we established 2 working groups. One technical working group focused on custom matters, and another working group focused on the OGA matters. And our committee need to meet at least once every year, and the Secretariat need to meet at least 2 times per year. And then the technical committee can meet as much as it's needed. So this is the functionings of a Cambodia Committee on Trade Facilitation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bodia. Can we please invite Mr. Shafola from the ECOWAS to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Moderator, my fellow panelists and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm hoping you can hear me clearly. Bring you greetings from Abuja, Nigeria. As explained, we do know this session is on National Trade Facilitation Committees, but we are bringing the regional perspective. But before doing that, perhaps I could just remind you of who ECOWAS is. ECOWAS, established in 1975, is a 15-member regional group with the mandate of promoting economic integration in all fields of activity of its member states. It's considered as one of the pillars of the African Union, and ECOWAS was set up to foster the ideal of collective self-sufficiency for its member states. As an economic trading union, it's also meant to create a single large trading bloc through economic cooperation by inter alia, the harmonization of economic policies and the establishment of a common market. So in terms of the trade facilitation, a regional trade facilitation committee was established by the ECOWAS Council of Ministers in June 2021, with the objective of serving as an advisory body to the ECOWAS Commission on all matters related to the coordination and the monitoring of international, continental, regional, and national trade facilitation initiatives related to simplification, modernization, and harmonization of export and import processes. In terms of its composition, the Regional Trade Facilitation Committee is made up of member states who are represented by 3 competent persons which are the ministries responsible for trade, customs administration, and also the organized private sector. It's also made up of representatives from the ECOWAS Commission, as well as regional private sector umbrella organizations. The committee meets at least twice every calendar year, and those meetings are convened by the ECOWAS Commission. In February, in February 2022, indeed, the committee had its first meeting that was chaired, as you've said, Your Excellency, by Ghana, who is the current chair of the community organs. And that meeting, they discussed strategic regional trade facilitation issues and adopted a work program. The operationalization of the ECOWAS Regional Trade Facilitation Committee marks a decisive turning point in the implementation of measures contained in the Trade Facilitation Agreement, which was adopted in Bali. Thank you.
Thank you, Shofola. I was told that I can advise Madagascar and Ecuador to turn off their cameras. Probably when you speak, the voice may be clearer to the interpreters. So can I call Ecuador to make that intervention, please? Ecuador, you have the floor.
Gracias, presidente. Un saludo afectuoso desde Ecuador. Espero que me escuchen bien en este momento. Como les estaba comentando, en Ecuador el Comité Nacional de Facilitación de Comercio se creó en marzo del 2018. Está presidido por el Ministerio de la Producción y Comercio Exterior y está integrado por todas las entidades que están vinculadas a la actividad.
Unfortunately, the interpreters cannot hear you. So what do we do in this case?
Compromisos en materia de facilitación de comercio, así como también compromisos en la misma materia que tenemos con otros acuerdos comerciales. El sector privado es parte integrante de este comité. Hay representantes permanentes de organizaciones horizontales.
Sorry, Madagascar, the interpreters cannot hear you. So we apologize for that. I think we have to proceed.
Creo que hay problemas. No
to
sé
the
si
next session. I mean, to the
me
next.
escuchan bien ahí, no sé. Creo que hay algún problema con la conexión.
There is challenge really in the technical side. Now, I think I will proceed.
Bueno, sí, bueno, revisé acá y todo está bien. No sé, hay algún problema. No sé si me escuchan ahí.
Madagascar and Ecuador, kindly bear with us. The technical fault is still not solved. So maybe in the course of the program, if the technical fault is rectified, we can invite you to come back. As for now,
Okay.
we'll go to the questions directly to the finalist. Thank you. So we have specific questions to ask the panelists and to address, to respond to those questions also in 2 minutes. Starting with Turkey. If I could turn to you and ask your thought again in 2 minutes on what you consider will be the main pillars of the National Trade Facilitation Committee in order to achieve a sustainable organizational environment. Kindly, can you respond in 2 minutes on this, please?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you also for raising this important issue, because establishment of national trade facilitation is one part of the story, but their sustainability is equally important. And because trade facilitation is a complex trade policy area, governments need to keep the work of the National Trade Facilitation Committee sustainable. And there are a number of factors that are influential when it comes to sustainability of the work that is being carried out in the National Trade Facilitation Committee. And there is no one single magical solution, but I think most important factor is the strong political will and ownership that's going to be boosted by the private sector ownership as well. Secondly, I think what is most important when it comes to sustainability is the legal backing of the work in order to shield the work of the committee from internal dynamics of internal developments, which means there should be a kind of strong legal document to base the work of the committee, be it in the form of presidential decree, law, or a ministerial decision. And the committee itself needs to have a kind of specific, strong work plan as well as terms of reference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. The next question will go to India, Mr. Vijay. Mr. Vijay, if I could follow up with you, as we have had, India's National Trade Facilitation Committee structure is quite extensive. Can you explain the same and the reasons why India adopted such a structure? Just 2 minutes.
Thank you, Excellency. So we all know that India is a large country, has all the 4 modes of export and import. Its federal government and federal structure has many ministries. It also took on its plate far more than what was provided under the TF. And because of the ownership, it wanted it to be delivered well and in time. And to ensure that it adopted the 3-tier structure, provided for regular times. It had 96 measures. They were classified into 3 categories: short-term, medium-term, long-term. For each of those provisions, there was a ownership assigned to particular entity. And so if I may say so, that they recognize the challenge. As the representative from Turkey was saying, it's a complex exercise. It involves different stakeholders. When you take on board other stakeholders, and sometimes you need to, kind of use nudge or administrative changes or statutory changes. India has a wide experience of trying to, in fact, in some cases, use statutory, not just incentives, statutory push to actually get the trade to do what is right over a period of time, even as being sensitive to their own felt needs. So it adopted the structure essentially to implement that in time, and therefore there was a structure. And as I would say, that the proof of the pudding lies in eating. And the structure that we have adopted has actually substantially delivered on what was expected of it. Thank you.
I thank the 2 of you. I think your pillar approach to national trade facilitation structure is certainly useful for our understanding of the sustainability and continuity of committees. The model of India's National Trade Facilitation Committee is very well developed, and its ambitions clearly go beyond the TFA itself. I would like to ask all the speakers to kindly respect the time. Of course, India has really responded to that. The next question goes to Cambodia. Building on the themes of sustainability and resilience, I would like to ask you, Mr. Shea, if you can give us a brief insight into the main challenges your national committee has faced and how it has responded. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, Cambodian face many challenges in how to implement the TFA, but I would like to point out a few challenges we're facing. First, it's not really a challenge, but it's really a concern for Cambodian government in regarding the revenue collection. We afraid that we will have problem in terms of revenue collection, but later on when we implement seriously the TFA, I think to manage it, and the revenue keep increasing and met the targets. This is because a trade facilitation contribute to the growth of volume of trade. In 2017, our import and export account for 26 billion, and 5 years later, it increased to 36 billion. May I know if you can hear me clearly now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, and the second challenge is on the financing the implementation. Actually, Cambodia have been working quite well with the cooperation with development partner. We have crowded development partner who have implementation of TFA. We have Arrive Plus program from EU, we have JICA, we have UNCTAD, a Swiss Contact, a Global Alliance, Trade IMF, World Bank, and ADB. So in this 5 year, our category A have been reduced tremendously from 80% in 2017 to 60%. I'm sorry, the category A was 60. My apology. The category A was 60% in 2017. Now the category A increased to 80% in 2011. That's because we also benefit from the donor. But the category C now, we still have 13% of the measure, which is the most difficult article to implement and requires the financial assistance, typically on the building infrastructures and software. That is the main challenge of our NCTF, how to receive the support from donor to implement this, because most of the donors are concentrated on capacity building, but the actual needs, we need the financial assistance on the infrastructures and software, which are not given by our donor community. That is why in any international event, I would like to call for donor community to show some flexibility, to provide more financing in terms of financial and infrastructure. The second challenge is on the notification. The notification itself, we can manage it, but notification of dedicated dates of category C, we are not able to identify now because of lack of support of donors. When lack of support, we are not sure when exactly we can implement them, we can finish the project. I think this is the real challenge facing Cambodia as LDC right now. And the third challenge is the coordination, the engagement with other government agency in the time of, writing up the policy and also during the implementation, and especially to get involvement from private sector, because in generally we feel that there is a lack of understanding of the provision of the TFA among the private sectors. So Chair, this is the main challenge facing Cambodia and CTF right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madagascar. Before you drop, since we have only 4 speakers now, let me pose another question to you. Since Ecuador and Madagascar, and we have only 4 speakers. So the next question to you is, what do you see as the role of national trade facilitation committees in securing the assistance required for implementation of category C provisions? Sorry, did you hear me? Madagascar.
Oui, oui. Ah, d'accord. Bonjour, est-ce que vous m'entendez maintenant?
Sorry, I'm trying to call Cambodia. Cambodia, can you respond to the second question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes,
Can I repeat the question?
please, Chair.
Yes. What do you see as the role of the national committees in securing the assistance required for implementation of Category C provisions?
Mr. Chair, because the National Committee of Trade Facilitation in Cambodia have launched the roadmaps. And under our roadmap, there is one a function that's working in collaboration with the donor community. And then we have produced our action plan for 2022 to 2024, which allow us to work concretely how to get financing from a donor community. And for us, we organize a meeting with donor, what we call development partner meeting in the country to see whether some donor can show flexibility in regarding the financing the projects. And by working with the donor so far, I think some donors try to show in this flexibility in financing the infrastructure. For example, a Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation Swiss Contact in Cambodia. We got financing from them to working on the pre-arrival processing, especially on the postal item. So I think the NCTM need to work harder, to reach out to wider donor community to let them know that now we are in critical point, probably it's a crossroad where the technical assistance on capacity building will not accelerate the implementation of TFA. And we will repeat that the donor community should show the more flexibility on financing on infrastructures and software. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I made to understand that Ecuador can respond to the question in English, which I think will help us to progress. Ecuador, the question I will pose to you now is, what actions can a national committee take to guarantee the implementation of TFA?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and our apologies for the inconvenience with the connection from Capitol. On behalf of our National or Undersecretary of Trade Negotiations, I would just like to point out a few elements regarding this question. And we believe that the effective implementation of TFA requires an effective national committee that needs to work well and that involves all the national agencies that are involved in foreign trade, but also needs an adequate coordination with the private sector. The vision and joint work, public and private work, helps in the implementation of a trade facilitation agreement. Committees also should adapt themselves to the current context, international context, like the pandemic. There were a lot of efforts that many national committees had to do regarding this challenge, and Ecuador was also among them. We think that the concept of trade facilitation has to go beyond duties and borders. It has to include relevant topics. And for that, we think that it's very important to have the support of international organizations in the work of empowering national committees to do their work. Also, it is important to count with technological tools that will allow a proper monitoring, that will help national committees to have a strategic vision on the implementation of the agreement. Keeping up the exchange of experiences among countries is also a very good way to keep up with the work of national committees. In line with what I just mentioned, Ecuador, as the president pro tempore of the Indian community, organized recently a workshop of national committees, trade facilitation national committees, with the participation of Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador. These allow to know more about experiences that each country has and the challenges that each one is facing. So we consider that this exchange is very useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before I open the floor to the audience, may I last give the floor to Shafola of ECOWAS to give us in 2 minutes, what are the challenges at the regional level?
Thank you, Your Excellency, and thank you for that question. Before I go into the challenges, just to recall that although we know the agreement was signed by member states, it is very important to note that the TFA itself states that members of a customs union or a regional economic community may adopt regional approaches. And we know that when we talk about trade facilitation, moving goods across borders, there are certainly regional initiatives that can be leveraged upon. In West Africa, trade facilitation has been at the center of our regional integration efforts. And we've had a number of achievements involving strengthening trade facilitation institutional structures, building capacity of SMEs, developing trade information systems, interconnecting customs systems, as well as establishment of joint border posts, including other relevant transport infrastructures. When we come on to talking about what are the challenges, it's been mentioned by earlier speakers. We build our strengths upon our individual member states, our national trade facilitation committees. And we know at that level, there are challenges sometimes with institutional frameworks, a lack of a legal, perhaps the lack of a permanent secretariat to make sure that the work continues on a daily basis, and sometimes also sustainable mechanisms for budgets. It's important that trade facilitation committees are well funded in order to be effective. Sometimes as well, we find some of the challenges are related to inadequate planning. Perhaps there is a limited or a very brief or not clear roadmap. It's important that each member of the Trade Facilitation Committee has a work program that they're working towards, so we know it leads to an end objective. Other challenges we find at times are that although partners want to support, and this support is very welcome, there are sometimes challenges in the coordination and duplication of resources, as well as perhaps initiatives. So it's very important that as the trade facilitation committees themselves coordinate internally, be it national or regional, our partners as well in their support also improve their coordination efforts. And finally, just to touch upon once again the issue of resources, both financial and technical. It's very important that these committees have the strong backing in terms of resources to undertake what is a very critical task, especially in the advent, not only of the trade facilitation agreement, but also the advent of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Thank you.
So please, Madagascar has requested to try one more time. So can we give Madagascar a chance? Madagascar, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Est-ce que vous m'entendez maintenant? Allô, vous m'entendez?
Yeah, continue. Let's see whether they can interpret.
OK. Alors, je m'excuse pour cette interruption de la technologie. Je ne sais pas si je vais faire juste un petit résumé de la situation de Madagascar. Alors, le CNFE de Madagascar, donc, il a été créé en 2016, comme il a été dit, et c'est un comité qui est coprésidé par le président, c'est-à-dire le directeur général du commerce et le directeur général de la douane. Ce rôle duel de ces deux entités donc, nous permet de vraiment faire la complémentarité de la compétence entre ces entités qui sont les majeures parties. Mais ce n'est pas juste ces deux entités qui interviennent, mais il y a aussi donc le secrétariat permanent qui gère de façon technique et logistique du CNFE. Et à côté de cela, il y a les groupes de travail. Ces groupes de travail, donc, ce sont des groupes de travail ad hoc qui gèrent les mesures qui sont en cours de réalisation. Par exemple, on a eu des mesures strictement douanières et il y avait des groupes de travail dans ce sens. La composition des membres de notre comité, ils sont donc variés à 2 points différents, c'est-à-dire le département ministériel et le secteur public, parce qu'on veut que toutes les entités prenantes qui sont impliquées dans la facilitation des échanges soient impliquées dans le comité. Je vais juste faire un petit bref par rapport à comment se passent les activités du CNFE de Madagascar. Alors, par rapport à cela, donc, le CNFE a mis en place la feuille de route pour que cette feuille de route permet donc de faire tracer les mesures prioritaires que le CNFE doit suivre durant un délai de 5 ans, de 2018 à 2023 pour l'instant. Et ça nous permet donc de répondre comment on va mettre en place les mesures des 28 articles. À côté de cela, donc, il y a aussi un problème énorme qui s'est été posé, c'est-à-dire comment on va gérer le membre des comités, parce que les membres du comité de Madagascar, maintenant, ils sont dans les trentaines. Et les articles à gérer, ils sont 28 articles qui sont notifiés dans le catégorie C. Donc, la question qui se pose, c'est comment on va gérer ça. Et grâce à l'appui de la CNUSED, financé par le UK, qu'on remercie ici, nous avons utilisé le Reform Tracker, qui est un outil en ligne pour gérer le travail du comité dans sa globalité. Et c'est une initiative qui a été très appréciée par toutes les entités prenantes parce que ça répond même aux problèmes de la pandémie où on ne peut pas se réunir, mais toutes les activités se font en ligne et en temps réel. Et un des challenges que notre comité est en cours aussi fait face en ce moment, c'est les problèmes de voir aussi les financements adéquats. Certes, on a déjà eu pas mal de financements pour certaines de nos activités qui sont écrites dans la feuille de route, mais on espère toujours avoir encore l'appui des partenaires techniques et financiers pour nous aider dans la réalisation de toutes ces activités. Et je termine mon intervention donc par appuyer ici que le rôle du comité a été vraiment appuyé par le Reform Tracker qui a été offert par la CNUSED et ça a été vraiment un outil qui nous permet de faciliter, d'accélérer le travail du comité. Certes, il y a encore à venir des travaux à faire, mais on remercie cet outil qui nous permet d'avancer un peu plus. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. So at this stage, I open the floor for question to the panelists. I can see UNCTAD. Yes, Paul, followed by the United States.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon. First of all, thank you to the panelists, and also let me start by saying happy anniversary and congratulations to all the members on the efforts and the progress made on the implementation of the WTO TFA. If you allow me just a few comments on some of the issues that have been raised. As you may know, UNCTAD maintains an online database which now has 134 national trade facilitation committees represented. This will soon hopefully be linked to the WTO TFA database. And we also include a sustainability index for national trade facilitation committees in there. On this basis, we have since 2015 conducted a biennial study on national trade facilitation committees that are represented in the database. And the latest study is being published in the coming weeks. And just a few points that are worth noticing in this context. From the study, we see that some of the biggest obstacles for NTFCs are, one, the funding issue. And this has been mentioned several times during this session, including the funding issue for National Trade Facilitation Committee secretariats, which I would like to just comment on briefly. I think sometimes this is an issue that is a bit misunderstood. It is not always necessary to set up a brand new entity, a brand new secretariat, having more staff when you can find the resources within the existing structures, and do this in a collaborative approach, including having the private sector contribute, whether it's in kind, whether it's with studies, whether it's by secondment. So I think there are things there for many countries to look at, and that can maybe assist in solving the funding issue. The second issue that we see, or the second most mentioned issue, is lack of knowledge. And I think Cambodia mentioned that in the intervention. Lack of knowledge of trade facilitation issues in the committees. And one of the things we see is a huge turnover amongst National Trade Facilitation Committee members, which obviously doesn't bode well for the sustainability of committees. Third point, the lack of political support. And we see in many countries that there is a lack of a proper champion that leads the committees. And this is really very necessary. India mentioned in their intervention that they have set up a system where this is supported from the top. And I think this is one of the reasons for the success in India. Fourth and fifth point, lack of motivation and engagement of the committee members. And that links to the correct representation in the committee, including the private sector, which was mentioned by US amongst others this morning. It is necessary to have all of those entities represented, public sector, private sector. And let me just finish by saying that COVID-19 has certainly had a profound impact also on national committees. Working in virtual environment is not easy, and we even see that in this session. And it has been a challenge for many committees. We are happy that many committees are now starting to use the reform tracker tool that was mentioned by Madagascar, and we see that that can assist. And finally, I think the regional collaboration amongst committees is extremely important, and therefore we are very happy to see and support many of these regional committees. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. United States, please.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. The LDC group commends all the speakers for their insightful remarks. I underscore the role of private sector's involvement in the National Trade Facilitation Committee. However, what we observe, especially in like least developed country members, it is challenging. It becomes a challenge for us to well accommodate the private sectors, how we can hear the real voice or all voices of private sector through limited representatives they represent in the committee. Because what happens, like the person who represent in the committee may have limited perspective instead of broad perspective of private sector. Then he or she tries to highlight some specific issues in their own interest instead of the concern of entire private sector. In that case, we may not be able to exactly or more broadly accommodate the concern of private sector. So it would be appreciated if any panelist could briefly highlight how we can institutionalize the views of private sector in an appropriate manner so that the private sector could also be made responsible to their voices and the real private sector's concern could be accommodated in the committee's functioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Madagascar. Sorry, Nepal. Due to the time factor, we will not be able to go around to the panelists. I will just appreciate all the panelists for their very enlightening interventions, and to reiterate that the National Trade Facilitation Committee is so much important that the agreement, the Article 23 of the Trade Facilitation Agreement has emphasized that each and every member should constitute and should be able to monitor and moderate the implementation of both domestic and the Trade Facilitation Agreement. And I think the gathering today has helped us to hear from various members, and we have shared experiences of how they are governing their Trade Facilitation Agreement. So with this, I wish to thank everyone for participation in this very important session. And the session now comes to a close. I thank you all.